Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Pain Heart and Home Healing After Loss. So, almost 2.5 years into my grief journey, I honestly can't believe that I can come out with an episode entitled The Best Part About Grief. Because, let me tell you, when you first enter into the world of grief, there's literally nothing good about it. And you kind of feel like nothing's ever going to feel good again, or at least that's how I felt. But my husband and I were talking earlier in the week, and I was sharing some of my heart about something with him. And it kind of like stopped me in my tracks as I was sharing. And I literally said to him, I was like, oh my God, like that's so good. I have to write that down. And it's something that the thing that I said was something that I've actually been doing for a couple years now, but I never really realized I was doing it consciously until he and I were having this conversation in the middle of my kitchen. The conversation we were having revolved around our responsibilities at church. Now, I won't get into my husband's walk with God or his side of the story necessarily, but, because that's his story to share. But I'll just say he and I are on totally separate, spiritual walks. Okay. Just because I've decided one way about my faith or my relationship with God doesn't necessarily mean he's decided all of the same things. But we do talk about these things often because it's a big part of our lives, even if it's a struggle. So what we were talking about was worship, particularly worship music. Because before our daughter Layla had passed, he and I were both very active on our church's worship team. He literally played guitar and sang almost every single week at church. And I sang at least twice a month, maybe even more sometimes. Like it was a huge part of our lives. And well, right after she died, we took a step back from literally everything because we were obviously so devastated. Like it wasn't personal to church. We just literally did nothing for, several weeks. But of course, Rick eventually had to go back to work. And, even though life felt anything but normal, you slowly start to do more than just sit on the couch and cry. Although I did this for a few months, I feel like, with my mom and my sister. But anyways, when it came time to talk about going back to church, like, our faith was rocked. Like, Rick and I had been Christians our entire lives. And after Layla died, it was like, God, are you even real? Like, we literally started to question everything. After 30 plus years, however old I was, of believing in God, we didn't even know if he was real anymore. And again, Rick and I were on completely separate journeys. So about 4 months after she passed, I decided I wanted to try to go to church again. But honestly, if I'm being brutally honest, the real reason I was going is not because I really wanted to, not because I still didn't feel absolutely betrayed by God, and it's not because Rick was even coming with me. So it's not like we were all going together as one big happy family, because he wasn't going for a long time. I mainly did it for the kids. I wanted them to stay connected to all of the friends and family that they had there. And, something just deep down in my gut just knew that even though I still hated God for what had happened, I needed to bring the kids to church. I just felt it in my gut. So I started going back for them. And people started asking me almost immediately when I came back. They would ask me things like, oh, when are you coming back to the worship team? Or, I was also the person that ran our church cafe before she died. So they would ask, when are you coming back to the cafe? And for some reason, every time somebody would ask me this question, I got this icky feeling inside of me. And I was like, why does this question bother me so much? Like, they just miss me, they want me to be part of the things again. They want me around. So this should make me feel good that they want me to come back. Why does this bother me so much? So after really sitting and thinking about it, and I put a lot of thought and effort into why this question bothered me so much, I realized these questions were such a bother because of one simple word in the question. And it was the word back. When are you coming back? When will you be back? And the reason this word back bothered me so much is because back implied to me that the same Emily that left these responsibilities 4 months ago, they wanted to see her again. But in my head, that version of me, didn't exist anymore. And so even though I didn't really know how yet, I knew that who I once was wasn't who I was anymore. And so when people said to me, "When are you coming back?" that icky feeling that I was getting was happening because it insinuated that people were looking for that old me. And they were looking for that old version of Emily to come back and pick things up, right where I left off. And, if you are someone who has suffered baby loss or a child loss, a stillbirth, or literally just any, life-changing, profound, or devastating loss in any way, you know that you are no longer that same person anymore. And so I really didn't like when people said this to me because I wanted to shout it from the mountaintops. Like, I'm never coming back because that old version of me doesn't exist anymore. So stop looking for the old me, basically. And of course, I knew people weren't trying to be malicious or make me feel bad when they said it, but it definitely was not my favorite question. So from that moment on, well, really, it was immediately after her death. But once that adrenaline of the loss started wearing off, a few to several months later, however long it was, that is when I started realizing, I am a different person now, which I definitely was, and I still am. It's time to start making some really conscious choices. I no longer am just going back to what I used to do simply because that's what I've always done. And so I started really picking apart everything in my life. This is when I started decluttering because every single item in my house was now up for debate. It was now, is this the old version of me kind of item, or is this the new version of me kind of item, And, I cleared off our calendars of all of the things we just always do that. So that's why it was on the calendar. Or, when we started filling it with really intentional things like quality time with one another and the kids. And, prioritizing relationships that were important to me and things that we really enjoyed doing, not that we just had to do. And, things that made us better versions of ourselves, like being more generous and having more gratitude and things like that. And of course, not long after that, we were dealing with Rick's health, and we spent almost all of 2024 in and out of the hospital and whatnot. But ever since that moment where I figured out why it bothered me so much when someone would say, "When are you coming back?" I have been carefully selecting, carefully examining, and carefully curating a life that truly reflects who I am, what I believe, and why. And so the way that this all ties back to worship music, which is what I started talking about at the beginning of this rant, is I have recently really been missing being on my church's worship team. I really miss singing because, after I had started going to church again, worship music, it was really hard to listen to, honestly, because having believed that God had turned his back on me, and I didn't even know if he really loved me anymore or even existed sometimes, most of the words in worship music songs were yeah, okay. Is that even really true? I kind of had that attitude. None of it really felt true anymore. But, as I worked through things with God, and I could do an entire separate podcast episode on what that process looked like for me. And it's a lifelong journey. But as I worked through some things with God, I realized that I really do love worship music most of the time. A lot of it is still hard for me because when I hear it, it makes me feel close to Layla because I know she's with Jesus. So hearing it can be hard. And so there's that whole emotional side to it. But one of my hesitations about singing on the worship team again all comes back to this, living a carefully curated life, because I really don't agree with some of the things that worship songs sing about. I just don't anymore. Not everything, but there are definitely some things that I used to just sing because it was a part of the song. And now I'm do I really think that about God? Is that what I now know about God? And as I was expressing this to my husband, as we were having this conversation, I said to him out loud, I said, I actually really appreciate that I question these things now, because it just goes to show you that my relationship with God is more real than ever. And I was like, whoa, that's when I said it out loud, I was like, holy crap, I gotta write that down. Like, that was something that I truly had to be thankful for. And like I said, I had been living like this for a couple years now, being really intentional about everything in life, but especially my relationships. But there's something about the way that I came to this realization just a few days ago, standing in my kitchen. Like, for years, yeah, I sang on the worship team. Since I was literally 13 years old, I've been on the worship team. I've sung so many songs to God, and literally have led hundreds of people in worship. And I'm not I'm not implying that it was all a sham. Like, none of it was a sham or fake to that old version of Emily who just did what I did because that's what I did. But I never really questioned anything or carefully examined, like, do I believe that? Is this important to me? Is that what I feel and what I believe? Or was it, I was just taking someone else's word for it, and that can only take you so deep into a relationship if you're just doing things because that's what somebody told you to do. And so I say all of this to say, even though grief royally sucks and the loss itself will never be intrinsically good. Like, my daughter dying will never be a good thing in and of itself. But the best part about grief is it gives you a more obvious opportunity to reevaluate everything in your life. Okay? It doesn't force us because we always have a choice, but it gives us more of an obvious opportunity because we could do this at any time. Like, we don't have to wait for tragedy or loss or, these crazy circumstances to strike. But grief really does give us a bigger opportunity to say, why am I doing this? Why do I believe this or say these words or sing these words? We're more inclined to reflect on all of our actions, our choices, and the things that we hold really dear to us. And in the midst of this really deep sorrow, like, we're in a way confronted, like, with our own self and our own vulnerability, which usually, encourages some deep introspection. Is that a word? I think it's a word. That pain, it tends to, like, strip away every single distraction around us and all of the layers that we've built around ourselves and on our schedules and our calendars and just in our lives. It strips that away, and it allows us to ask the hard questions, which usually start with words like who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I think a lot of us are just going about our everyday because it's what we've always done, or, it's what we've always been taught, or that's who we've always spent our time with, but all of these answers, all of these questions, they can all be changed when we decide to make that change. And so grief gives us that opportunity. And so this questioning process can definitely be painful, and it can certainly be hard work sometimes, but one that often leads to a much more authentic understanding of who we really are and what truly matters to us. And, this opportunity to reevaluate our lives can and most likely will, in turn, lead you to so much more of a fuller life. A richer one with deeper, meaningful relationships that mean so much more to you than they did before. And a life where you can learn to choose to prioritize the things that really matter to you and then let go of the things that don't. It can bring us a life where you can build healthy boundaries and not just be a victim to the busyness or the chaos of life. This opportunity for reevaluation can lead you to a life that you truly love to be a part of now, even in the midst of a devastating loss. This is the best part about grief. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope this episode resonated with a lot of you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It means a whole lot to me when you do that, and it goes a long way. I can't wait to chat with you all again really soon. Signing off for now, your hope dealer, Emmy Smith.